What's up, guys? Coming at you today with a little bit different video. Normally we're pretty fancy when it comes to the editing and the B-roll and all that other stuff, but today's topic or subject had to get talked about ASAP, okay? This topic's a pretty big deal for every single hunter out there, honestly. Anybody within the whitetails range, chances are you're going to need this information for the upcoming season. Something happened this year that's going to dramatically affect the outlook on what's going to happen during the 2021 season. It's going to affect a lot of people's success rates, most likely. It's going to affect a lot of people's tactics. It's going to affect a lot of people's, hunting strategy for this coming year. So I guess I should have said something a little bit earlier. It was on my list of videos to bring up. For whatever reason, they got pushed to the side. But there's still time. There's still things that we can do as hunters, habitat managers, property owners, people like that. There's things that we can do to combat what happened. So I'll get right to it. I'll get to the nitty gritty. And I'm also going to get to things that we can do from a strategy standpoint, whether it's hunting or the management side of things, to combat what happened. Like I said a little bit earlier, but I can't stress it enough. There's things that we can still do. It's going to affect deer negatively otherwise if we don't, and in some cases it still might. But basically, for those of you that remember back in, it was about April is when it was, we had a different spring, okay? At least for a shorter period of time. We had a really big cold snap, okay? I know what you guys are thinking. We've had that before. What's that have to do with my outlook on September, October, November, December, January, hunting whitetails? I can't really affect much. We've had cold fronts before. This was a record cold front, okay? When that stuff happens, certain things change the outlook of the season, whether it's for the deer or the crops. And I bring up crops. So the crop I'm going to talk about isn't necessarily something that's planted by people. I mean, it is, but it's not one of the crops that you're probably thinking of. So when we get this cold front late in the year, ultimately, I guess the best way I can put it is you're watching the news and the weather guy or the meteorologist says, hey, go cover up your plants. It's going to get cold. Okay, one of those natural growing plants, the white oak, was affected by this late frost. So what does that mean? All right, guys, you're already doing the math in your head. It means white oak production and acorn production is going to be down this year, dramatically down. Where? Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Missouri, Iowa, all these states across the whitetails range, down into the Ozarks and into Arkansas. A lot of the whitetails range, guys, is going to be affected. You can actually go to the National Weather Service website and look at where, look at the historical weather and see where the record lows were hit. Okay, so that ultimately affected the flowers that bud from the white oaks, which if it kills those, there's no acorn production. Simple as that. So it's not the end all be all for acorns as a whole. The thing that is a little bit different between white oaks and red oaks is this frost this year that we got in April is going to for sure affect the white oaks this year. It's not actually going to affect the red oaks until next year. That's the difference between one of the differences between these white oaks and red oaks. So when you're going in the woods and you're thinking, he's nuts, he didn't know what he's talking about, I'm still seeing acorns. Probably seen a lot of red oaks, and the red oaks are generally less palatable, less attractive when you compare them to white oaks. Okay, so now there's a couple things that we can do. Whether you're the public land guy and you can't really plant food or do anything like that, there's a hunting strategy that you guys will most likely be able to use in most portions of the country. And there's things you can do as a private land guy too. So like I said, I'm bringing this video up. It's mid-July right now, late July. There's still time for everybody in the country to still get food sources planted, okay? Whether it's one of those fall crops, the radishes, the turnips, the blends. Give the deer variety. Deer love variety. Deer need variety. These plants and a lot of these fall blends are going to mature at a different rate, which ultimately makes them palatable at a different rate, which makes them more attractive at a different rate. Well, not only is that good for the deer, but that's good for your hunting. So with that being said, if you guys haven't or didn't plan to in your neck of the woods to get a food plot in, and you could have, maybe you should. Let's say you're a public land guy, and even a private land guy in this scenario can really use this information to alter how he's going to hunt this year. Because if you hunt the same way, hunt the same oaks that aren't necessarily dropping this year, it's going to affect you negatively, most likely, unless you get some dumb luck. So, which happens, man. I'd rather be lucky than good in the whitetail woods, but nonetheless, there are things that you can do to make sure that you are more successful. So, if you think about the way, hot and cold works, hot and cold air, talking about thermals a little bit, but especially if you understand that concept, this will especially make sense to you, or this is even a more basic version of it. Cold air always falls, guys. Cold air goes down, warm air goes up. So let's talk about hill country for a second. A lot of places, with a decent amount of topography, ultimately a lot of that cold air during those cold fronts sunk deep into a lot of these valleys and ravines. What does that mean? It's not likely that there's going to be any white oaks or white acorns produced lower in elevation. Now, I'm not saying there has to be like thousands of feet of difference or anything like that. A little bit of difference could make all the difference in the world. And even some of these high points and some of these ridges still might have affected the very top thirds of the ridge. So what does that really mean? Well, like I said, the acorn production is definitely going to be down lower in elevation on some of these ridges, and even maybe towards the top. But there's something you can do to ultimately combat that as a hunter, okay? Hunt higher. So if we hunt higher, where hopefully this frost didn't quite affect the white oaks as badly this year. Now if you think about it, or if you're not familiar, a lot of times in theory, these mature bucks like to bed on the top thirds ridges. Okay. Now the natural food source in a lot of big timber, top thirds of ridge. Okay. Level playing field, literally. The nice thing about hunting on the top thirds of ridges, which is something that I like to do anyway, is you're dealing with a consistent wind. So if you're dealing with a consistent wind, you don't have to worry about those swirling winds that you always get in the bottom. And now, hopefully the whitetails movement, especially within the big wood setting, is going to be a little bit more predictable. Now, I'm not saying you're not going to kill deer in the bottoms. Every situation is different. But at the end of the day, whether you're hunting private land or public land, guys, there's a difference between how you should attack or attack the hunt or strategize, because it's going to make a difference now, especially during the time of the year in which the acorns are the most productive and dropping, I guess you could say, are the most attractive. So let's push hunting aside for a second. What does this really mean for the outlook, in late into the year, throughout the winter, and even into 2022? Guys, we got to pray and kind of cross our fingers that we don't have a horrible winter, because now we think about it as hunters and land managers and property owners, one of the main food sources is gone. Okay, it's not completely gone. You're still going to see some white oaks, especially in higher elevations or places where this frost didn't hit, which it hit most places, to be honest with you. But it's going to affect the deer. Okay, so if, as a private land guy, if you don't have food to get these deer through late in the season or through spring, especially those last 4 weeks of spring, depending on, how late winter does go. Or I should say the last 4 weeks of winter, depending, obviously the later into spring, winter pushes itself. It's not good for whitetails. So having food sources, does this mean you need to go out and power bait? Probably not, guys, because rumen acidosis is something that can affect or happen to whitetails, and that's a whole different topic for a whole different day, I guess you could say. Overbaiting your deer and just gorging them to death. That happens a lot of times in a little bit farther northern climate, where you're dealing with those harsh winters. So as a public land guy, if you can't bait or do anything like that, what can we do? We got to just hope for the best. So from the standpoint of being a hunter, it's going to affect you guys this year. Change your strategy, change your tactics, use some of the tactics that I talked about. From a herd manager and things like that, property owner, like I said, try and get the food plots in if you can. Otherwise, guys, we just got to cross our fingers. So nonetheless, I want to get this video out there before it was too late. We still have time. Like I said, if you're anywhere in the country, you can still get those fall blends in. You can possibly even put in soybeans yet. Okay, I'm not saying you're going to produce a pod with those soybeans, but it's going to be an attractive food source. Probably not your best idea. I'd go with a fall blend over one of those over soybeans, just because the soybeans are going to be really attractive early. If they don't produce a pod, they're useless late in the year. There's a lot of food early in the year. We really need to focus on what's happening throughout the season and what we can try to manipulate or accomplish, I guess, throughout the year. So try and get one of those fall blends in if you can as a private guy. As a public guy, just hope for the best, hunt accordingly, and ultimately, guys, I'm wishing all of you luck, and hopefully we got a mild winter and this doesn't really affect the deer herd too bad at all throughout the country, but you just never know. So with that being said, guys, good luck this year.